Welcome to Awake Us Now. Today's program is sponsored by Awake Us Now. And now, here's Pastor Dodge.
Good morning. Welcome to Awake, and welcome to our ongoing study of the Gospel of Matthew. This is week 31, and if you will recall, we were talking about Jesus in the temple in these last days before his arrest and crucifixion and resurrection. During that time, Jesus especially engaged with the religious authorities, with leaders of all different stripes, calling them to the truth of the Scriptures and to the living God. Jesus made it very clear, and the Bible makes it very clear, that it is possible to be incredibly religious and yet have no real, genuine relationship with God. And that's what he is addressing here today. Individuals who had authority and power, but who, frankly, did not understand the Scriptures and did not respond to what should have been absolutely obvious to them. Now, we had mentioned that Jesus relates a series of 3 parables. We had taken a look at the first 2 of those 3 parables last week, as Jesus brings both an indictment and a sentence against the religious leadership. And now we come to the execution. This is where we pick up in Matthew chapter 22, beginning at verse 1. We read, Jesus spoke to them again in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his servants to those who had been invited to the banquet to tell them to come, but they refused to come." Now, Jesus used parables all the time. And as he used parables, these short, pithy, and powerful stories, he is speaking as a devout Jewish man, an individual who is part of the culture of his day, a true God, yes, also a genuine human being. And Jesus uses images that the rabbis frequently used, that were widely used in his day. When you told a story about a king represented God himself. He is to be the king of Israel. A wedding banquet for devout Jewish people in the first century, a wedding banquet always referred to the coming of the Messiah and the great celebration that would occur when Messiah was here and when the kingdom was established. Now, as Jesus shares this story, what he's saying is, I'm telling you a story. There was a king, i.e., God, who prepared a wedding banquet, i.e., the Messiah's coming to Israel, and he sent his servants and he invited to the banquet all those who had been invited. In other words, the Jewish people, the nation of Israel. And then he goes on. He says, then he sent some more servants and said, "Tell those who have been invited that I prepared my dinner. My oxen and fattened cattle have been butchered and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet." Now, it's a second invitation. In the ancient world, especially in ancient Israel, if you invited someone to a banquet, you would invite them well in advance of that banquet. You tell them, it's coming up, mark this on your calendar, in effect. And now, what the king is doing, even though they have refused to acknowledge his invitation, he invites them a second time. Tell these people who've been invited, everything is ready. Come now, the banquet is prepared. In other words, Messiah is here. But they paid no attention, verse 5, and went off, one to his field, another to his business. The rest seized his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged. He sent his army and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Now, as Jesus is speaking this, he knows full well what is coming, because in just a couple of chapters, he's going to say what's going to happen to Jerusalem, because when Messiah came, the religious leadership and many others rejected him. Not only rejected him, but killed him. Jesus is giving the people of his day a heads up. Judgment is coming on this city. Verse 8, then he, meaning the king, said to his servants, "The wedding banquet is ready, but those I invited did not deserve to come. So go to the street corners and invite to the banquet anyone you find. In other words, the prostitutes and the tax collectors, as Jesus had mentioned just earlier. Go invite them. And invite the non-Jewish world, the Gentiles. So the servants went out into the streets and gathered all the people they could find, the bad as well as the good. And the wedding hall was filled with guests. But then there's a twist to the story. But when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. He asked, "How did you get in here without wedding clothes, friend?" The man was speechless. Now, in the 21st century, we often look at this and say, why is the living God, the king, coming down on somebody who isn't dressed appropriately for the wedding banquet? Why is he so picky? One of the things that we know from antiquity is that when kings invited people to a major feast, kings often provided the clothing that they would wear. And in other words, this is an individual who's not receiving what the king is offering and who is turning down the gift the king has given. And so what does the king do? Then the king told the attendants, tie him hand and foot and throw him outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are invited, but few are chosen. Now again, we look at this. Many are invited. Why aren't all invited? In Jewish parlance of the day, when you speak of the many, it's speaking of everybody. And when you speak of the few, you're emphasizing the fact, although all were invited, a lot of them chose not to come. And that was true of those who were initially invited, the religious leaders, the people of Israel. But it was also true of those who were gathered up from the streets, who didn't receive what God had offered. And what is at the heart of what Jesus is saying is, there is salvation and life in Him, and in Him alone. And He is making that very clear in this parable. He is challenging the religious leadership, and He is reminding them, everything the prophets spoke of has been fulfilled. They have seen His miracles. They have witnessed what He has done. They have heard Him speak and realize no one ever spoke like this before. But still they reject Him. And so here in the temple, Jesus lays out the judgment to come. Then the Pharisees went out and laid plans to trap Him in His words. And so we read this. They sent their disciples to Him along with the Herodians. Now we need to pause right there for a second. They sent their disciples, in other words, individuals who were attracted to their teaching, along with the Herodians. Now, what do we know about the Herodians and what do we know about the Pharisees? The Pharisees were incredibly devout. In terms of their doctrines, they agreed with Jesus on all the main things. That Messiah was coming, that the dead would be raised, that there are angels and demons, that the prophets speak the very word of God. The Pharisees accepted all those things. They were very, quote-unquote, orthodox. And the Pharisees, they despised the fact that Israel was under the control of Rome. And they yearned for the day when they would be free, and they hated having to give any recognition of Roman authority and power. Who are the Herodians? They're individuals who accepted King Herod the Great and then his sons, Archelaus, Herod Antipas, Herod Philip, and they basically wanted to get along with Rome. They were comfortable accepting Roman domination because they still maintained a lot of authority, power, prestige. To put it mildly, the Pharisees and the Herodians were on opposite sides of the political fence. And so now these two groups are joined together. It's the old thing, the enemy of my enemy is my friend at work here. And so they come together, and here's what they do. They say, "Teacher, we know that you're a man of integrity and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth." They are pouring it on thick. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are. Tell us then, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? Now, the imperial tax, the poll tax it's sometimes referred to, was something that was demanded of all Jewish people in Israel under Roman rule. It was something that many Jewish people despised. I mean, paying taxes to the Roman conquerors, paying so that basically they can continue to rule over us. Now, there were some taxes that were acceptable. We saw one example of that a few chapters ago when Peter and the other disciples were asked, "Why doesn't your teacher pay the tax, the temple tax?" Now, that was different, and it used different currency. It used the drachma, actually a half of a drachma, and that was something that was acceptable to religious Jews. But the Roman tax, that wasn't. And so they think they've got Jesus on the horns of dilemma. No matter what he answers, either the Pharisees or the Herodians are going to be able to go and say, "This guy is dangerous and he needs to be done away with." If Jesus comes down in favor of paying the taxes to the Romans, the Herodians can go to the temple authorities. If, on the other hand, Jesus says, "Don't pay the tax to the Romans," the Herodians will go to the Romans and say, "This guy is fomenting rebellion against the emperor and against Rome." It appears that they have him nailed. And as a result, they're really taken aback. Now keep in mind, these guys have had the opportunity to scheme and plot and plan together, and they have come up with what they think is an ironclad way of doing away with Jesus. And on the spur of the moment, Jesus just cuts their legs out from under them, if I may be so bold. But Jesus, knowing their evil intent, said, "You hypocrites." And keep in mind that word hypocrite. It means an actor. You guys are putting on an act. Here are these two groups that are on opposite sides of the issue, but they're coming together against Jesus. "You hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the tax." It's very informative to look carefully at what Jesus is saying. He's saying, "Show me the very coin that you have to use to pay the tax to Rome." It was a hated coin because it had a picture of the emperor on it. And it really shouldn't have been in the temple, in the holy place. But Jesus asked to see it, and guess what? They have one. I'm guessing the Herodians had them, but who knows? "Show me the coin used for paying the tax." They brought him a denarius, and he asked them, "Whose image is this, and whose inscription?" And keep in mind, the denarius was a very small silver coin, about the size of a U.S. dime. It had an image of the emperor on it, and at the time that Jesus is saying this, the image was of Tiberius, and it acknowledged him as Lord and God. So they have this just downright blasphemous image, and they bring it into the temple and show it to Jesus. They reply, "Caesar's." In other words, Caesar's image is on it. Then he said to them, "So give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." And right there, they're lost. There's nothing they can say. They can't accuse him of anything. And what he has spoken is the truth. Give to Caesar what Caesar deserves, and give to God what God deserves. It's a brilliant answer. I mean, even if you do not accept Jesus as the Messiah, as the only Son of the living God who took on human flesh and came to earth and died for our sins and rose from the grave and is coming back, even if you don't believe that, you have to admit the guy was brilliant. Now, I believe he is the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth, the living God come to earth in human flesh, who died in our place, who is risen from the grave, and who will return at the end of days. He is also brilliant. When they heard this, they were amazed. So they left him and went away. It's like, what can we do? You know, we thought we had the perfect question, and he disarmed us totally. And so we read, that same day, the Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to him with a question. Isn't it interesting how all of these diverse groups who despise Jesus are just coming at him one after another after another? You know, have you ever been at a point in your life where you feel that everywhere you go, somebody's attacking you? And that's exactly what happens here. The Lord whom you are seeking will suddenly come into his temple, the prophet Malachi was told. And now the Lord whom they were seeking is in the temple. And what are they doing? They're trying to destroy him. One group after another after another. So the Sadducees come. And keep in mind, what do we know about the Sadducees? The Sadducees did not believe in the resurrection. The Sadducees did not believe in angels. The Sadducees did not believe in demons. The Sadducees basically said, we will only accept the Torah of Moses, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. If it's not in there, then we don't accept it. They didn't believe the resurrection because they said, show me the resurrection in the Torah. Now, you can go to the Hebrew prophets and you'll find the resurrection. You go to Isaiah 26, your dead shall rise. You go to Daniel chapter 12, multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will arise, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. It's in there. It's in the Psalms. It's everywhere you turn. But they said it's not in the Torah, and therefore we don't accept it. And so now they come to Jesus and they say, Teacher, Moses told us that if a man dies without having children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up offspring for him. And what they're referring is something that is referred to in the Torah on 2 specific occasions. First of all, in Genesis chapter 38, we read about Judah's sons, 3 sons. The sons were Onan, and Shelah. There we go. And died. Onan was told, marry your brother's wife. He was more than willing to have sex with her, but he didn't want to provide children for his brother. He just wanted to have fun. And so he withdrew rather than allowing her to become pregnant. And he died. And then there's young Shelah who's left over. But Judah is scared to death that Shelah's going to die too. And so he keeps his daughter-in-law waiting. Now, this is something that happened before the law was given to Moses, but it was apparently a common practice, not just among the children of Israel, but among other cultures of the day as well, that you wanted to make sure that a person did not die without having offspring. It's also mentioned in Deuteronomy 25, verse 5, and there God tells Moses, here's what's to be done, and Moses lays that out very clearly. And so they come and they bring this issue. A man died, and his wife didn't have any children, so, Moses said the brother must marry her. It's what's known as levirate marriage. Well, they go one step further. They say, now, there were 7 brothers among us. Now, all it would have taken is 2. One brother who dies without offspring, and then the second brother should marry the widow. But they want to make this absolute farce. And so they say there were 7 brothers among us. The first one married and died, and since he had no children, he left his wife to his brother. The same thing happened to the second and the third brother, right on down to the 7th. You can almost see the glint in their eyes as you read this, can't you? And those who are on the sidelines are with their heads slightly turned, kind of chuckling and laughing. Oh boy, we got him now. This is a good one. Finally, the woman died. Now then, they said, at the resurrection, whose wife will she be of the 7, since all of them were married to her? And they are they are laughing behind his back. They think, here we have a perfect illustration of how crazy the idea of the resurrection is, because it's not mentioned in the Torah. Well, Jesus lets them know it is. And this is what we read. Jesus replied, "You are in error." Note that he does not waffle. He just puts it right out there. You are in error because you do not know the Scriptures or the power of God. Now, the Sadducees are the ruling elite. The high priests were Sadducees. The ruling family were Sadducees. They are the creme de la creme of Jewish society at the time. And Jesus says to them, you don't know the Scriptures and you don't know the power of God. At the resurrection, people will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like the angels in heaven. And right now it's Jesus who's rubbing salt in the wound. Because keep in mind, the Sadducees don't believe in angels. And Jesus is saying they're going to be like the angels in heaven. In other words, what we see on earth right now is going to be different in the resurrection. And then Jesus goes on, but about the resurrection, have you not read what God said to you? I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He's quoting from the book of Exodus, chapter 3, verse 6. It's when God met Moses at Mount Sinai in the burning bush and identified himself. I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Jesus says he's not the God of the dead, but of the living. He seizes on a grammatical point to make a theological one. God did not say, I was the God of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob, because all of them had been long dead by the time of Moses. He says, I am the God. And what Jesus is saying is, you deliberately ignore the Scriptures. You don't take the things you like the prophets. You only accept what's written in the Torah, but even there, you don't do due diligence with the Word of God. He's not the God of the dead, but of the living. When the crowds heard this, they were astonished at his teaching. Can't you just imagine, as the temple courtyard is filled with thousands of people coming from all over the Mediterranean and all over the Middle East to be there for the Passover. And they see and hear this amazing teacher from up in Galilee who has performed incredible miracles. People are talking about him. And now they watch him handle the high priests, the Pharisees, the Herodians, the Sadducees. He destroys them. And they are just incredulous. They are amazed and astonished at his teaching. And so, hearing that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. Okay, no longer are the Pharisees sending their disciples. Now they're coming to Jesus. They get together and they think, we're going to get him. These other folks couldn't handle him, but we can, in effect. One of them, an expert in the law, trained student of the Scriptures, tested him with this question. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Now keep in mind, in ancient Israel, many of the rabbis, and even to current days, searched all of the different laws that are mentioned in the Hebrew Scriptures, trying to identify which are the most important. How would you rank them? Put these in order. There are over 600 of them that have been counted. How do you rank them? And they asked Jesus this on the spur of the moment. And here's what Jesus says. Jesus replied, verse 37, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And at that point, they're amazed. And at this point, we need to stop. We'll pick up there next time.
Thanks so much for listening to Awake Us Now with Pastor Chris Dodge. Today's program was sponsored by Awake Us Now. We hope today's message was a blessing. If you are asking yourself, now what? We encourage you to learn more about God at our website, awakeusnow.com. And please come back and join us again next time.